Hello, and sometimes I feel I have to Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by my co-host with the oddly shaped head, Andrew Williams. How you doing, Andrew?
Yeah, that's why I have trouble finding goalie helmets that fit. Thanks for reminding me. Appreciate it. But
That's literally a joke in this film, I think. They have those weird motorcycle helmets and like a bumper sticker that says, I don't know, something about motorcycle helmet laws.
yeah. Anyway, I'm fine. I had no issues watching this movie again, but just waiting for the Criterion sale to start.
I'm excited to dive in. I mean, first off, this is also a very easy watch for me, a movie I've seen a number of times, but I'm excited in general for this brand new theme for the month. Saturday Night Live movies. A very rich category, I would say. It wasn't hard to assemble the films we're talking about this month, and I don't know, there's going to be some layups and there's going to be some challenges. That's how I'm anticipating this month going, but I think we're starting with a pretty easy one. But Andrew, are you much of an SNL guy? Or maybe a better way to ask that is, when's the last time you watched SNL live?
Live. Ooh, that's been a while.
Or a complete episode. How about that?
I watched the Ryan Gosling episode a couple of months ago when he was on. I watched the Nate Bargatze episode too, which was genuinely one of their funniest episodes in a really long time.
See, I just
probably about two or three episodes a season. I like.
Okay.
Genuinely,
if it's a host you're particularly interested in, I gotcha. I assume the way I watch it is like most people in the age of internet, social media.
Yeah.
I see the clips. I see like when a certain scene pops off, like Ryan Gosling, the Beavis and Butthead skit. Hilarious. Yep. I've watched it multiple times. But a complete episode, man, for me, probably when Bill Burr hosted, and that might have been pre-pandemic. It's been a few years, actually. So, but in general, I wouldn't call myself the biggest SNL fan. I like a lot of the talent that comes through. I like improv comedy, even though SNL's weird because it's the mecca of improv, but they don't really do improv. Anyway, I don't think. Look, hashtag positivity podcast. I don't want to start off on a bad foot, be super negative, but
I was gonna say, man,
are there really a lot of great episodes of SNL? Because I feel like even like the best eras, you've got talent that you love and skits that you love, and there'll be like some really high points. But I feel like every full episode I've watched, there's one or two skits where I'm like, this one ain't hitting.
I think that's true for almost any sketch comedy thing in general. Like, because I've been watching a lot of SCTV, Second City Television, when they had a much less circulated television show for a while. And it's another one that when you look at the people that were on it, like Harold Ramis, John Candy, Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas, Rick Moranis, it's just like a who's who. It's like every single
The Wendy's
comedian.
guy was on there?
Yeah, specifically him. No, the Dave Thomas we're about to talk about eventually a little bit, because he's in this. But it's wild watching those sketch comedy shows. But there's always even if you have a host that's really really good, they're not in every sketch. Even if you have a cast that's really really good, sometimes it just doesn't work. Like, it's funny on Seth Meyers. Sometimes they'll bring in people and they'll talk about sketches that like didn't make it to air, or sketches that like played at Dress but did so badly they pulled them. And Will Ferrell talked about one, and then sometimes they'll do them on Seth Meyers. They'll call it Second Chance Theater, and they'll do. Then Will Ferrell talked about this one where he played a super fan of, oh god, what's the guy's name? He was the main guy on Welcome Back, Kotter, and Gabe. I gotta look now. It's gonna drive me crazy. Gabe Kaplan. Gabe Kaplan. And John Travolta was also on that show, for those of you being like, hey, that's his show. Yes. Anyway, so it's Gabe Kaplan. So the whole sketch is centered on Will Ferrell being this super fan of Gabe Kaplan working at like an insurance company. And Gabe Kaplan comes into the office and nobody tells him. So like that's the whole joke of the sketch, is that this guy who like models his whole look and life after being Gabe Kaplan didn't get told Gabe Kaplan came into the insurance office. And so like Will Ferrell and all the guys are like, this is the funniest thing ever, but then like it went in front of an audience and just died miserably. And like they just never did it again. And then they did it on the on Seth Meyers eventually, and it was ridiculous. But like I would watch. There's another more recent one is I Think You Should Leave. I don't know if you've seen I Think You Should Leave, the Tim Robinson sketch show on Netflix.
Man, all right. I just said about SNL. You watch an episode, some skits are duds. I think you're right. That applies to a lot of sketch comedy. I Think You Should Leave is unique in that not every sketch makes me laugh, but it makes me something. It does something. But
that was kind of where I was going, was that like there's sketches on I Think You Should Leave where I'm like, this is genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And then there's other ones where like one of the first episodes, there's a whole thing where like it's Sam Richardson, I think, is the host, and they're doing like a baby, like the most like the buffest baby or something. And the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like,
yeah.
What is this? Like, what is happening? Like, what is going on?
Definitely absurdist comedy, like as opposed to laugh out loud sometimes, or just gets insanely introspective. It's what a bizarre show that I love.
Yes.
Yeah. Agreeing with all that. Do you have a favorite SNL era? I mean, I feel like, we're basically kids in the 90s, so like the first big era that comes to mind for me is like Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, early 90s. That's certainly, if I wasn't watching it live, that's what I was watching either on reruns or like those best of DVDs. I used to rent those a lot. So those are the ones, that's the earliest era burned into my brain. So like by default, I kind of say that's my favorite era, but what about you?
Probably just because that's the one that was around the most. The era right after that with like the Jimmy Fallon, the Will Ferrell, the Rachel Dratch,
Tina Fey,
Tina Fey, that whole group comes right after, and I feel like that's what's on when I become like aware of SNL. So I do remember that one a lot. I have gone back and watched the originals, and here's what I'll say about the original SNL: it is groundbreaking. And for every single amazing sketch, there is a really bad one. So,
dude, classic SNL. Sometimes there's sketches where I'm like, I don't know what's supposed to be funny about it, and it's not like I Think You Should Leave. We're just talking about where it's just absurd, but it's like, okay, you're playing a character. This is the scene, but like, what's the joke? I feel like I'm missing something sometimes.
Yeah, I have that feeling a lot. I mean, SCTV is no different. Like there's sketches where I'm like, this is like there's a bit on SCTV that I love, because I don't know if you know who Michael McDonald is, the singer.
No, I know Michael McDonald, the Mad TV star.
Yeah. Anyway, there's the singer Michael McDonald. He used to do a lot of stuff with the Doobie Brothers. Did some stuff with Steely Dan. Went on to have his own solo career. But there was this period of time in like the early '80s where like Michael McDonald sang backup on like, I swear to God, like 20 songs in like 2 years. And so it'd be like a Christopher Cross song, and then all of a sudden Michael McDonald is singing backup, and you're like, what? Michael McDonald's most famous claim to fame for most of our generation is probably being the subject of that DVD they keep playing on the TVs in the 40-Year-Old Virgin. And Paul Rudd says, if I have to hear Yamo Be There one more time, I'm going to Yamo burn this place to the ground. That's probably most people's vision of Michael McDonald. But SCTV did this gag where they had Rick Moranis playing Michael McDonald, like recording vocals, and then getting into his car and like insanely quickly driving to the next studio so that he could record backing vocals on the next song. And it just kept doing that the whole episode, or like over several episodes. And like, that's a gag that I think is absolutely stupidly specific and hilarious, and I love it. But then there'd be like, John Candy would play Orson Welles, and I would be like, this should work on paper, but it doesn't. And like, it's always going to be a mixed bag. There's no way that you can't just bat 1,000. It's tough.
Yeah, very true.
I was going to say, especially in a situation like SNL where it's a weekly show and you have to create all these sketches. Something with like, I Think You Should Leave at least has the benefit of like, I think the seasons are only 6 episodes, and I think they're only like 15 to 20 minutes long. So like you really can like curate that and like really focus on like what are the good, like, you know, what's the best that we can do. And you can you put your best foot forward because you have the ability to do that. Whereas with like a live show week to week, sometimes it just won't work.
Well, of course, today we aren't talking about SNL, the TV show, because every week we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's SNL month, and this week we are talking the 1993 film Coneheads. Now, Andrew, what is your history with Coneheads, with this movie or this sketch, which predates this movie quite a bit? Like I'm trying to remember if as a kid I knew this was actually based on a sketch. I'm not sure that I did.
My parents definitely told me that it was like an SNL thing. But like my brain was kind of like, oh, like Wayne's World was an SNL thing. I didn't realize that the Coneheads were like 1977. So this was like a 16-year later follow-up to Coneheads. So, you know, not at all topical in the way that Wayne's World was. So it didn't really make a lot of sense almost at all for them to do this, but they did it anyway.
Is this, can't remember if we had this discussion on mic or not, but like Blues Brothers predates this as far as an SNL movie, but this is the first movie based on a sketch, right? Because I wouldn't really consider Blues Brothers based on a SNL sketch. It's more like characters that sprung out of that show. But I feel like this is the first time.
Yeah.
It feels a little different to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too pedantic here, but it feels like clearly in the 90s, they were like, all right, this is the next big thing for us. We're going to greenlight a bunch of movies. They make a ton of them. This is technically the first one, well, second one after Wayne's World. My point is, they looked at their history of sketches and characters, and they chose this one to revive for a movie. And I find that so odd.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I've always sat with this movie. Like, don't get me wrong, I watched it all the time as a kid. You talk about my history with this. Like, I didn't watch the sketches. My parents knew what the sketches were. I didn't. You know, my mom would have been 17 when this stuff was coming out. My dad would have been in his 20s. 77, he'd probably been 28, 29. And it's, you know, so it's relevant to them. It's topical to them. And it's tough for me to have any connection to that. So for the longest time, this was Coneheads to me. Like, this is what Coneheads was. And I actually saw the old sketches later and was like, oh, okay, I guess. That made it make even less sense to me about why you'd look at that and be like, yeah, let's make a movie out of this 16 years later.
Quite bizarre, but I saw the movie a ton. I mean, we had to have owned it just considering how many times I watched it.
I think it was in the vault.
The Williams vault, the vaulted Williams vault. Yeah, I'm sure I saw it on TV a bunch. Yeah, it's certainly, absolutely. To this day, if I hear Tainted Love, I think of this movie. That is absolutely burned into my brain. So many scenes are burned into my brain, but there's some scenes that we'll get to it. We'll get to it when we cover the scenes, but first we gotta set the stage a little bit here. This movie is released July 23rd, 1993. It's made on a budget of $30 million. At the box office, it only brings in $21.3 million. Critically, it's not well received. It holds just a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. It wasn't until researching for this podcast that I realized this movie actually bombed. With how much I saw it as a kid and my whole family liked it, I just assumed it was at least a modest hit. And then I'm surprised to see that the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 37%. Because I thought everyone likes this movie, even if they don't love it. I've said this before, but this movie comes out in 1993, so in order for it to get audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes, people are logging onto that website over a decade after this movie comes out, looking up this old movie and writing a negative review for Coneheads. What are you doing with your time? But I was surprised to see it's only 37%. I thought there was more love for this one out there.
Yeah, I would have said the same. I would have expected at least in like the 50s, like a little bit more split, like something like that. But Yeah. Also, I will say the critic score is 35% based off of 31 reviews, which is not
Sure.
the biggest sample size. But it is, yeah, that audience score is wild. Like, I would have expected this, like I said, at least be like the nostalgic kind of, oh, that was a fun movie I watched when I was a kid. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised by that. Because I felt like it was everywhere. I felt like everybody watched Coneheads. Like, everybody's seen Coneheads. I don't feel like anybody hates it. Like, I feel like most people are like, oh, all right, whatever.
Taking a look at the creative team, this movie is written by Tom Davis, Dan Aykroyd, and the writing team of Bonnie and Terry Turner. So breaking it down here, Tom Davis was actually one of the original writers on SNL, creator of a bunch of sketches that would go on to be pretty prominent and legendary, such as Coneheads, as well as The Continental, that really weird Christopher Walken one, where it's just like him and a camera as the entire sketch. It's so funny to me that Christopher Walken, obviously he was never an SNL cast member, but he hosted so many times, he got his own recurring sketches. Anyway, I really love those sketches.
There's a sketch he did. He only ever did it once, but he played a gardener who was extremely afraid of plants. And it was and his whole gag is that he puts eyes on all of his plants so that he can look them in the eye, because that way he knows where he stands with them. And he hates grass because he can't add eyes to grass. It would be ridiculous. So he just never goes near his grass. Because, he's got these big giant guys. He puts eyes on them and he's fine. But the grass, they just sink to the bottom, man. He can't do it. But
guarantee you that sketch was thought up at 2 a.m. Like,
absolutely. No, I love it. Some of the other stuff he did. So he did Coneheads. He did the Continental. He did Theodoric of York, the Medieval Barber, which was a Steve Martin, Steve Martin's another guy that hosted so much that he got his own recurring characters, essentially. And Theodoric of York is one of them. And then another one that he was responsible for was Nick the Lounge Singer, which was just Bill Murray's, one of his recurring characters kind of early in his run. It would... I don't know if you remember the Culp family musical ones that Will Ferrell and Anna Gasteyer did later on, where they were like the two, like Will Ferrell was sitting at the piano and she was singing, and it looked like they were like older, and they would play like weird, ridiculous versions of like popular songs. But it's the same format for what Nick the Lounge Singer was.
I vaguely remember this, now that you described it.
But, he'd be if you ever hear about the Bill Murray thing where he sings the Star Wars theme and adds words to it, that's Nick the Lounge Singer, where he's like, Star Wars, let's have some Star Wars. Like, that's what Nick the Lounge Singer did. They brought him back at for the 40th anniversary special. I remember they brought Bill Murray's Nick the Lounge Singer back to add words to the Jaws theme, where he sings the love theme from Jaws. And again, just very, very funny. So Tom Davis, a funny guy, turns out.
Well, R.I.P. Tom Davis did pass away a little over 10 years ago at this point. So R.I.P. Dan Aykroyd, we'll talk about him more in just a moment. But then you have the writing duo of Bonnie and Terry Turner, also SNL alums, which is how they get roped in here. Funny enough, Andrew, they would go on to create a show called Third Rock from the Sun about aliens that come to Earth and try to live amongst us. I genuinely wonder if that was a second attempt at what they were attempting here, or if it's just kind of a coincidence. Like, were they like, this concept would be great week-to-week television, let's change it up so it's not exactly Coneheads? Like, there's got to be some kind of shared
connective
DNA,
thread
right?
There. Yeah, like there is, because the whole joke of Coneheads was that they were aliens. It's the same joke, really. Like, aliens assimilating to culture on Earth, but just with Third Rock from the Sun, they look like normal humans. And not for nothing, Chris, who's one of the big stars of Third Rock from the Sun? Jane Curtin, who is one of the Coneheads. So, I mean, like, the connective threads are absolutely there. She's not one of the aliens in that one, but still, the lines are there. You don't have to. That's not a conspiracy, folks. You don't have to bring out the string and the corkboard for that one.
And then the director of this movie is Steve Barron. Now, he's got a few other movies under his belt. He did direct Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1990, one of the greatest films of our time.
Not familiar at all.
He would also go on to direct The Adventures of Pinocchio, which is the live action Pinocchio movie starring Jonathan Taylor Thomas as Pinocchio that I remember very vividly, but I feel like that movie has zero legacy. I feel like no
Absolutely.
one, not literally no one, but like I'm sure you remember obviously and stuff. Like people remember, but no one talks about it. No one watches it. I don't see it advertised on Disney Plus. Like I feel like it just. I assume it made money, but I was wrong about Coneheads. Maybe it didn't. I feel like it was a big deal at the time. It did not. Well,
it did not.
I was just
15 off 25 million.
Oh, oof. Well, that's why it has no legacy, Andrew. No one actually went out and saw it.
Man, it's got Martin Landau as Geppetto. Such a strange, like that seems like genuinely great casting for that too. Like I'm just
Totally.
like, wow. I that's a movie that if you put me on the spot and were like, hey, Andrew, do you remember the Adventures of Pinocchio with Jonathan Taylor Thomas? I think my brain would have been like, yes. Like, straining to reach for it.
I kind of want to watch it. Did we already?
You got enough
Disney
stuff to watch
remake
already.
I know. I have a lot. Well, I mean, if it becomes an episode of the podcast that I have to watch
we could have a literal Pinocchio month, I'm fairly sure, where we just did Pinocchio movies, and then by the end of it, we'd hate ourselves. But
what's your favorite scene this time in Pinocchio?
We could end it with the Del Toro one simply because it didn't make a box office, and we could justify it to ourselves and be like, this movie was critically lauded and everyone on the planet loves it, but oddly, it made no money at the box office.
It was only in theaters for 1 week.
Turns out that's not enough time to make any money, unless you're Avengers Endgame.
Well, other than those films, Steve Barron, he did a number of television, but his biggest accomplishment is definitely in the world of music videos, which is a classic career path for directors, especially in the 90s. You make some high-profile music videos before jumping over, but he never really left the music video game, and the artist under his belt, I mean, it's a very impressive videography? I don't know what you call it. What do you call a body of work of music videos? Filmography. It's impressive.
Still. So, I mean, he's literally responsible for Take On Me by a-ha, the kind of classic, the drawn sketch music video. He's got Burning Up by Madonna. He's got Don't You Want Me by the Human League. He's got Cuts Like a Knife, Run to You, Heaven, and Summer 69 by Bryan Adams. He's got Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. He's got For Your Eyes Only by Sheena Easton from the James Bond movie, the same name. Like, not a lightweight is about the only way I can put it. Like, these are like genuinely like massive like 80s hits that he was directing music videos for, and there's still Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. I mean, that was one of the first big, rotated on-air MTV music videos that kind of gained traction. I mean, yeah, I had no idea that he had done all this stuff. So, I mean, kind of, expected. Although, I guess if Coneheads and The Adventures of Pinocchio both did poorly back-to-back, that's why Hollywood stopped calling. But maybe you should have. Kept calling. Yes, there it is. All right.
You got that.
But yeah.
Andrew, I'm excited to talk about this film, so let's jump into it. Everything we like, all the positives about Coneheads. You ready?
Yes.
Beldar and Primat are aliens from the planet Rimulok with bald, cone-shaped heads. After their aircraft is shot down by fighter jets, the couple assimilate to life as Americans and start a family. When their daughter Connie is a teenager, they receive word from their home planet that a rescue ship is finally prepared to take them home, but Connie is reluctant to leave her life on Earth behind. That's it. I think that covers it, right?
Sure.
Yeah. There's an INS subplot. There's some stuff. We'll get into all that, but it's basically aliens living on Earth amongst us. They get the call to go home, but they don't all want to leave. Tale as old as time, Andrew. We're gonna talk about it, but first we got to talk about the cast of this film, as we always do. We're gonna start with the high point, the best casting, best performance in the movie. Because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the Call of Duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting a Mark Strong Award for Coneheads?
This is a tough question, Chris, because there's a lot of heavy hitters in this movie. Like, even of just like our main 5 or 6 cast members, like all of them are like I know who all of them are. Like, and I've seen tons of stuff they've all done. But I actually have to go with the relative newcomer to not just the Coneheads world, but to film in general. And I'm going to give it to Michelle Burke as Connie Conehead.
Dude, I also my Mark Strong Award winner. I thought I had a left field pick here. I think it's kind of crazy that we're lining up. I mean, I've got my reasons to go Connie, but wow, we're both picking Michelle Burke. That's fantastic. Andrew, you go first though. Why are you choosing Michelle?
I think she sits in an interesting spot because in the original sketches, I believe the daughter was very much like one of the Coneheads. Played by, I believe, Lorraine Newman.
See, I thought this concept was new to the movie. I didn't realize the daughter was part of the sketches.
So she, I believe she was in the Conehead sketch. Yes, so she played Connie Conehead first. But in the sketch, I'm pretty sure she's just like one of them. Like she's the same as them. She's just the daughter, but the same fish out of water concept. Yeah. And Lorraine Newman does have a cameo here as Larta Primat's sister, and Marlax is Phil Hartman's wife. So they bring in this list is a who's who of like 90s comedians. We'll get there, but I think she has an interesting spot to sit where she's clearly got these vestiges of like the Conehead kind of alien pieces of it, but then she's also got like the very like grew up in this culture, has that kind of just human experience that she's mostly been living with. And I think she brings the most energy to her role. I think she's able to roll with kind of the unnecessarily technical speak that the Coneheads do from time to time. She is able to then kind of just be a normal human from time to time. Like she sits in all of the spots, not just well, but extremely well. And I think being able to kind of jump in between both gives her character kind of a lot more to work with. And I think that makes for a really, really great performance. So I think she is a standout in a movie where she is arguably the newest one to the table. But despite that tall task, she is up to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's the fact that she... Okay, so like this movie, it's kind of got two things going on. It's got this like the immigration officers chasing them down. But we've also got this plot of them raising a daughter in America. And she is truly like a second generation child, much like you see in real life with an immigrant family to America. Their child is then like a child of two cultures, your family culture and the national culture. It's a very real thing. It's turned up to an absurdist degree here because her family's culture is an alien culture with weird high-pitched voices and strange ways of speaking and everything. But because she grew up in America, she has everyday American friends. She doesn't speak with any kind of strange accent. She is just like a typical teenager, but happens to have a cone head. But she doesn't really rebel against her family. She appreciates the cultures. Like you said, she'll slip right into the speak with them, but also has her own thing and wants to, have a boyfriend and experience normal American life. So that's my favorite aspect of this movie. Like, there's only so much, there's a good chunk in the beginning where they don't have a daughter and, like, they eat weird stuff and they don't understand things and those jokes are fine, but I'm glad that's not the entire movie. I feel like whenever it kicks up a notch to this level where they have a daughter that's torn between worlds and he's trying to be protective of her as she's growing up, that's when this movie is most interesting. So you got to go Michelle Burke as Mark Strong Award. She's at the center of what I consider the most interesting part of this movie. She plays it so well. And I've always thought she was so pretty. And, I mean, she is. But she has this giant cone on her head. And it doesn't matter, Andrew. She's a very pretty lady, despite the giant prosthesis. Incredibly difficult to pull off. And a lot of the scenes, like I've mentioned, are burned into my brain. She's at the center of it, like singing the soft cell song in the back seat. Always think of that. Crying green tears. Like, these are the scenes I think of when I think of this movie. So yeah, I think she absolutely crushes it. I mean, would go on to have a successful career, appears in a number of things. This is among her most high profile and seems to have retired from acting at this point. But I'm kind of surprised there wasn't more after this. I think she is phenomenal. But look, she's getting the Mark Strong Award.
The double Mark Strong.
Now, Andrew, we're going to talk about the main cast, but I think I really want to highlight all these people that are in this movie. I think, no joke, this might be the most stacked cast we've ever talked about on this show. Now, some of these people I'm about to rattle off here were not a big deal in 1993. They would go on to have greater success. So it's only in retrospect it appears so stacked. But if this movie's made just 5 years after this, the budget would triple, just with the number of people they're roping in here. So, here we go. Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, we know these.
Yes.
Michael McKean, David Spade, Chris Farley, Sinbad, Eddie Griffin, Phil Hartman, Adam Sandler, Jason Alexander, Dave Thomas, Drew Carey, Kevin Nealon, Parker Posey, Ellen DeGeneres, Tim Meadows, John Lovitz, Tom Arnold, Michael Richards. We know he's a horrible person, but it's a big name in the 90s. I mean, it's insane.
I mean, even like Eddie Griffin and like Julia Sweeney and like Jan Hooks, like these are all like SNL people. Like these are all people that were like on SNL at the time, and it's literally just insane. Like Adam Sandler is in this movie 30 seconds. But
at least
nuts.
He gets a scene and gets lines. Ellen DeGeneres is a swim coach, has no comedy. I think you only see her in profile. I just knew it was her because I recognized her voice. But like, she's just there as a small actor, not as like a megastar comedian.
Like, Tim Meadows shows up as like one of the Coneheads that gets killed by the monster. Like he's literally also in this movie, like barely. Like John Lovitz is in a scene as a dentist. Like, you know, it's Garrett Morris.
Drew Carey is a guy who gets in cab.
Like Garrett Morris is another SNL OG that's literally the driver of the ship that takes them off Earth towards the end of the movie. Like, this is literally just insane. Like, if you were... And, like, Jason Alexander literally is his neighbor. Like, he was... I don't know, had Seinfeld started at the time? I'm not sure. But...
There's definitely jokes about his hair where, like, we're supposed... Because...
Oh, you're supposed to know it's a toupee. Absolutely.
Right, yeah, exactly. But, like, he looks really funny to me with all the hair because I'm used to what Jason Alexander actually looks like. I wasn't sure if Seinfeld was a thing yet or not. But I was waiting for a joke for, like, his toupee to fly off or whatever. But it's just a ridiculous look just because we know what he actually looks like.
There's two bits. One is, it's both when he's fixing the lawnmower. One is he scratches the back and you see, like, the whole thing comes up. Like, the whole back of the toupee. And then when he blows the, like, spark plug or whatever, you see him quickly go, like, grabs the side of his head, like, very quickly, like, when he starts blowing it because he doesn't want the toupee to fly off. Also, do you want to guess how old Jason Alexander was when this movie came out?
Boy. 32.
34.
Wow. Well, it's just fun to look at this cast as a whole. Most of those people we just rattled off, we won't be doing a deep dive because they're on screen for seconds in some cases. But we got to go back to the top here, Andrew. Top of the cone, Dan Aykroyd plays Beldar. I like Dan Aykroyd.
Excuse me, that's Dan Aykroyd, Order of Canada, Order of Ontario.
Is this a reference or joke that I'm missing, Andrew?
No, he's literally a recipient of the Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario, which are just vestiges bestowed by the Canadian government onto prominent individuals.
Is he Canadian?
Yes, he's very Canadian.
I was not aware. But look, Dan Aykroyd, I like a lot of stuff that he's in. I like Dan Aykroyd. This is going to sound very backhanded, so I got to preface it by saying that. But I have thought to myself, is Dan Aykroyd funny? Because to me, he's almost always playing the straight man. Kind of, I don't know. I guess he's not here. Like, he's being absurd. He's talking in that super weird voice, and he's clearly at the center of a lot of the comedy. But, like, when I think of Dan Aykroyd, like, I just don't think of him, like, I don't know, telling jokes or being the punchline. Like, Ghostbusters are very much, I don't think of him as, like, the funny Ghostbuster, which is, one of the things he's most known for. I guess I've certainly seen him be funny on SNL, but I still think of him... I don't know, maybe it's just that I said a straight face. I don't know what it is. Either his comedy isn't quite my style, maybe, or he is just often in, like, the straight man role. But I think he exists in a very strange space where he's always like, again, this is my perspective. This doesn't have to reflect the views of everyone here on Best of the Rest, but he's surrounded by funny people more than I think that he is particularly being comedic.
I think he knows how to effectively place himself around those he's with. And I think he knows how to write for those people too, because that's the other thing. Dan Aykroyd does not just act in things, he also was a writer on those early years of SNL. He was also a writer on a lot of the films he did, and would do that. He got an Emmy nomination for that, and even won an Emmy for his writing ability on SNL. But
so you think it's a matter of him, like, not having an ego about himself and knowing how to be part of an ensemble or assemble the right people?
I think absolutely. I think if Dan Aykroyd inserts himself into, like, something like Ghostbusters, he knows that he's not the Bill Murray role. Like, he knows that's not his spot. And I don't think he'd try to do that. And Ghostbusters is a very interesting situation because I think about Ghostbusters originally was going to be Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, unknown as Egon, and Eddie Murphy as Winston. Like, and eventually Harold Ramis, who co-wrote the script with Dan, eventually comes into the Egon role. They considered a lot of people for Egon, but eventually becomes Harold Ramis, who himself had only acted in a few things before that. Stripes, probably more notably. And then but, like, when you look at that ensemble, like, clearly Eddie Murphy and Bill Murray would have been your outright comedic types. And it's Dan's job to know how to play off of that. And I think Dan Aykroyd does a very good job of that. I think his deadpan kind of response that he has to so much of what Bill Murray does in Ghostbusters is extremely effective. And so I think he's actually got a tremendous amount of talent. Anyway, I think Dan Aykroyd's really good. I think he just knows where to place himself.
Fair. That's fair. Jane Curtin as Primat Conehead. Fantastic. Both of them, I guess there's not much I can say about one performance on playing it to the other, but they are both so committed to this absurd character. They never drop the voice, the super serious look, the awkward mannerisms. They're always eating weird stuff. I mean, they are so committed to this thing. Andrew, I don't know if I've said it yet in this episode. This is a very weird movie. Whenever I think of... We hear people say this a lot. Not to speak for you, but I think it annoys both of us, where people are like, oh, you couldn't make that movie today. Because they're usually talking about a comedy that seems edgy, and like, oh, you couldn't make that today. To me, this is the kind of movie that cannot get made today. Right? It's just super weird idea, fully committed. I just don't see a landscape where this is released, has a major release in theaters today. This is, for better or worse, the kind of thing that we've lost. This movie it's so weird, and this is good. I keep finding myself prefacing this stuff, but like, I don't think there's anything particularly funny about the way they act and sound. I'm not saying that's bad, because I don't think every single thing is supposed to be funny, but like, they're so committed to talking in that voice in every single scene and moving so robotically, but it's not always for a joke. It's just they're just living as these weird alien creatures, and the end result is just a very weird film that I do like and do think is funny. But again, their commitment to this performance is admirable. And talk about your Dan Aykroyd lack of ego. I think I'm gonna have to agree. I think it's a very good summation of him, and like, their performance as these weird characters, I think, show a lack of ego to allow themselves to look so ridiculous on screen.
I think so. talking about Dan Aykroyd again for a second. There's just something so interesting about his career because he does kind of vanish from like major productions in the 90s and the 2000s for the most part. Like he gets boiled down to that like, oh, that bit part of like, oh, hey, that's Dan Aykroyd.
I remember seeing Pearl Harbor, and he's oh my god, he's the president whose name I can't remember. That's kind of embarrassing, but he plays the president in that movie. Andrew, who was the president during Pearl Harbor?
That was World War II.
Okay,
so that would have been FDR.
You're hesitating too. I don't feel so bad. Sure. Anyway, he shows up in a small. Okay, then good. I don't feel so bad not remembering. He plays somebody important. Who is he?
He's the captain. I don't know the name, but he's not the president.
All right. Anyway, he shows up in a small, super serious part in like a prestige role, and I feel like I hadn't seen him in 10 years at that point.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, well, Pearl Harbor was less than 10 years after this, so, but
I will
felt
say this that way, Andrew.
It felt that long. And the one thing I will say for Dan Aykroyd is he has carried the torch. He's wanted more Ghostbusters stuff for a very long time. And he's not in Ghostbusters Afterlife very much, but he does have a sizable supporting role in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And I will say this, probably one of the biggest joys I get out of watching Frozen Empire is that you can just see how happy Dan Aykroyd is to be playing that character in a movie again. You can, like, on his face in every scene, there is just this very palpable joy that he is feeling. That just, it's infectious. Like, when you see Dan Aykroyd as that character, like, there's a whole conversation he has with Winston at one point in that movie where he talks about, where Winston's like, look, we can't be Ghostbusters anymore. We're too old. This is, we're supposed to be enjoying our golden years. And he just looks at him and he's like, but this is what I want to do with my golden years. And you get that moment where you're like, Dan's not just acting as the character right now. Dan's literally like, if I could play Ray Stantz forever, I would, because that's what I want to do. And I'm not going to say, Frozen Empire is probably a really good candidate for a later episode, so I won't talk too much about it. But Dan's performance there, just kind of getting to come full circle and be part of a major production again as a sizable character and have it be that character, you could tell meant so much to him. And so I've always really liked Dan Aykroyd, is I guess the nice way of putting that. Jane Curtin alongside him is also, she's just been fantastic in everything she's in. Like, she's, from the original Weekend Update, or one of the early versions, I think Chevy Chase did it originally. And through her career in the 90s, and then obviously Third Rock from the Sun is like the thing that I most notably associated her with, because that was what I remembered her in. She's just been fantastic. And the dedication, like you said, they both have to playing these characters. The comedy of the Coneheads, I guess there's like a base level of like, they sound weird. And it's like, okay, but like, it's more the mannerisms and it's more just the way they interact with humanity that I think is where more of the comedy comes from. Just like what they call things is the funnier part. Yeah. It's not really it's not their accents or how they move. It's when they call it molten lactated extract of hoofed mammal instead of cheese. Like, that's when it's funny to me. But,
I think my first note is literally metallic Tinder discs, because that's what she calls the quarters.
Yep. So that's, to me, that's the comedy. The comedy is that they're just being needlessly technically specific about everything, versus just being like, yeah, it's a coin. I
think we can talk about Michael McKean as the INS Deputy Commissioner Gorman Seedling, and David Spade as the INS agent Eli Turnbull. I think we talk about them together. I don't think there's a single scene where they aren't together, and their relationship is where their comedy comes from. Michael McKean, his character is obsessed with tracking down the Coneheads because they are like the ultimate illegal aliens. It's the plot almost sounds like it would be providing some kind of deeper commentary. I don't really think that much thought was put into it in 1993, but he is certainly, to a comedic degree, talking about, aliens coming, taking Americans' jobs. Whenever Dan wants a green card at the end, he says, well, even though he saved his life, he's like, yeah, as long as you can demonstrate a skill that natural-born citizens don't already have. Like, it's just, to a comedic degree, he is dedicated to his job as an INS agent. David Spade, likewise, is committed to being the sniveling suck up.
He's committed to being David
kiss
Spade.
ass.
He's just
100%. I mean, David Spade has made a career out of being an absolute twerpy douchebag, right?
Yep.
I mean, that is his bread and butter, and he's very good at it. Like, that is not at all an insult, but he's very good at it here. I thought he was quite funny as his little sidekick.
Yeah, just like somebody would come up with information and he'd like steal it so that he could present it himself. Just like any chance he had to suck up to the guy or like undercut everybody else, he took it. I mean, Michael McKean has done. So I actually did not realize Michael McKean was a cast member of SNL in the mid '90s. But like in '94, '95, he actually joins the cast of SNL, which just feels strange because he would have been like in his late 40s. But I guess it's not that strange. But it's so interesting to watch him because like he plays characters like this where like he's not really being funny here. Like he's kind of just acting, like he's just playing like a serious character. But then you'll watch something like Spinal Tap where it's clearly satire and like he's clearly like, you know, making fun of like bloviated rock stars. And then you've got something like Clue where he's playing this manic, anxious Mr. Green. And every single one he does exactly what he needs to do. He's playing it perfectly with what he needs to be. So there's this true, and then like I know on Better Call Saul, he's also playing a largely straightforward kind of serious character. And so the fact that he's got all these different ranges and this different ability, I don't think people talk about it enough. So I mean, here he's dedicated to the part of what he's doing. Like you said, all the way to the end of him being like, yeah, I'll give you a green card as long as you designate a skill. Like, even then, like in that moment where he's literally left the planet and is now getting to come back, he still can't not be the guy doing his job. So, just fantastic. And David Spade is David Spade.
I think what you're saying about Michael McKean is just... I'm realizing I think it has something to do with people that are so... really come up in the improv world, comedy troupe, sketch comedy. They understand the importance of being part of the bigger picture, of doing their part, of being part of an ensemble. Like we talked about Dan Aykroyd already, but I think that's why, I mean, look, our Mark Strong Award, very well deserved, but it was a little difficult, more difficult than other movies to pick a Mark Strong Award winner because everyone's doing exactly what's being asked of them. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't feel like a star-making vehicle for just about anybody, but everyone's doing an excellent job. Anyway, just talking about, being part of an ensemble, I'm reminded of Phil Hartman, and we've talked about a number of times here, who, never really has like his movie where he's the star, although he is in a lot of like high-profile stuff, but he is always pitch perfect as whatever supporting role that he's in, and I think it has to do a lot with like his improv background and where he comes from. Like that's, he's called like the glue of SNL while he's there. And again, he's not in like the biggest well-known sketches, but he's always the hand playing the exact right component. So I think the reason, this movie's full of improv people, everyone just doing exactly their job. Like it's almost like when you're masterful of this craft, you don't necessarily pop, but hopefully if it's good, the product as a whole is memorable and comes out the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, I agree.
Andrew, it's a stacked cast. I think there's one more major player I want to cover here, then maybe we discuss the rest as they come up during scenes, but Chris Farley has a pretty big role here, maybe his biggest film role yet up till this point. He plays Ronnie, who is Connie's boyfriend. Connie and Ronnie, kind of funny. And he's just a goofy, dumb kid, full of hormones. He maybe gets too fresh at one point, gets taught a lesson. Like, I don't think there's supposed to be anything, again, too deep to look into there. He's just a teenager, although... Andrew, quick sidebar. Friend of the show, my wife, she's watched this movie with me. She's seen it a million times. She can quote the hell out of it. But she said several times, like, this feels a little problematic. It seems to make it clear that Connie is very much in high school and Ronnie maybe isn't. Did you get that feeling too?
Well, because at one point they're at the car dealership. She's like, why would it take so long to do this? He's like, because I was out back finishing a beer. So like, that implies that he's of drinking age, and she's clearly in high school. Or is she in high school? I don't know. Like, assumedly she's in school, but like
they're at a dance at the end, right? Isn't that a school dance?
I don't know. I don't know if it's made clear, but
Well, it's like a community thing because he gets the award there. I don't know. It's weird.
There was definitely a moment where he mentioned finishing the beer, and what she was saying, but also she like doesn't drive, even though her dad's a driving instructor. So like, I would assume that if she were able to drive, she would. Like, she has her dad drive all of her friends. I don't know. The finishing a beer, because I assumed she was in high school, and then like as I watched the rest of the movie, I was like, I guessing it never says she's in high school.
It never says she is. It never says he isn't. My brain puts it together.
My brain is assuming that because he's drinking a beer, he's drinking it legally, but that also doesn't mean
because a kid would never sneak a beer.
I'd never lie about that, but there was definitely a moment where I had that moment of like, wait, I'm doing the math like on the side. I like pull out my phone. I'm just like, get the graphic.
Is this okay?
Let's get these on the axes here and see how this lines up.
I love Chris Farley in this movie. He's so much playing a character and not being. Dude, it's just like we were just saying about improv stars. Like, he's not trying to steal the show. We know he's capable of it. He goes so much bigger in a lot of other roles as he grows in his star power. But I'm reminded of, take this walk with me, if you will, Andrew. Galaxy Quest, a movie I know we both enjoy. There's a pretty good documentary about that movie, about the making of it and its legacy. And Justin Long, who appears in the movie, talks about his performance because one of his first film roles. He's like the super nerdy super fan of the show, and he ends up like helping them in the big finale because he knows the ship inside and out. But he's so like starstruck whenever he's talking to him, and he gets like really overwhelmed and really excited. And he's talking about like how he put this performance together, and he just cited he said it was a mixture of two things, but one of them was Chris Farley. And he specifically cited Chris Farley's sketch on SNL where he interviews people, but he's super nervous. Like, he's interviewing Paul McCartney. He's like,
yeah,
you remember when you were in the Beatles? Yes, Chris, I do.
Awesome.
That was awesome. But he says that's specifically where he got the like, because he like comes to an abrupt stop. Did you ever see Terminator 2? And he does that. Once he points that out, like, I see him in Galaxy Quest, I'm like, yes, he's doing Chris Farley. But it feels like something new because he's, a different actor doing a new thing. But that's very much the mode Chris Farley is in here. Awkward teenager, super, again, full of hormones and really difficult to get the words out. And you can see, like, the energy of a chihuahua trying to be withheld behind his eyes and mouth. And it's he's again, he's playing a role. It doesn't feel like Chris Farley Unleashed. It feels like Chris Farley playing young awkward kid.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to see that Chris Farley kind of, like, for his short career, like, I think seeing him in something like Coneheads and then again in Wayne's World and the stuff he did, then ultimately kind of getting his own starring vehicles, I think it kind of speaks to what all these people thought of him. They wanted Farley to be a part of these things, and he makes the most out of everyone he had.
It's wild that he doesn't star in an SNL movie. If you were to, like, ask me, hey, was Chris Farley ever the star of an SNL movie? I'd be, yeah, of course. But then you stop and think about it, and it's like, no. Like, Tommy Boy, Black Sheep, Beverly Hills Ned, like, all the starring roles have nothing to do with SNL, but he does appear as supporting actors in a ton of SNL movies, of course.
I think there was an intention to do a Matt Foley movie that never happened because he passed away, but I believe that was going to be. I want to say that I read somewhere at one point they were going to like do a they were going to do like a Matt Foley. That was like because like it's an SNL movie. It's like cool, but like what characters did he have that you could have made a movie out of? Like that's kind of where I always say, it's like, how could that have never happened? It's like, yeah, but like, did he have recurring characters? And like Matt Foley is like one of the few recurring characters where I'm definitely like, okay, yeah, that's the one. But it's and I'll say this is I say this about a lot of SNL movies. It's like that which works in a sketch does not necessarily work at feature length. It's something more like, is 90 minutes of Matt Foley really what the world wants? And the answer is probably yes, but it unfortunately never got there.
Andrew, it's a stacked cast. We know that. We've talked about it, but we've got to talk about this movie. We got to dive into these scenes. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about our personal favorite scene of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What would you say is the best scene in Coneheads?
I thought about, there's a couple of scenes I really, really like, but the one that I came back to, and the one that even as a kid I remember, is when he's narfling the Garthok. Because first off,
as you do,
the stop motion they use on the Garthok is awesome.
It's really good, right? Like,
it's insanely good. It's like clearly like it's not CG. It's clearly stop motion. They've clearly put it all together, and it just looks really good. I was just even like watching it now, I would say that like largely it holds up. There are other things in this movie that hold up less well than this scene does. Because that's how good that stop motion is done. And the way they integrate it and everything, I think it just that. So first and foremost, the creature looks fantastic. It's a cool design. Clearly something about this planet makes things grow a cone head. I don't know what it is. It includes these weird beasts. But getting this kind of insight into Remulac, the planet, kind of seeing how it all works there, but then also it's the perfect culmination of, to this point, you've got Beldar that's largely been about like waiting to return to Remulac. He's like, all he's really wanted is to go back. And this is the moment where he kind of realizes that everything he's done him going to Earth is the only reason he's still alive. Like, what he does to beat the Garthok, he only learns by being on Earth. And so that's like the moment the character is like, no, I don't think I want to be here. I think I want to be there. And like, obviously he knows that that's where his daughter wants to be. And that's the thing that he considers. But like the culmination of everything, like first off, just the gnarly creature, the whole environment we're seeing here, and then combining that with him using golf to beat this thing. I just thought it was all just a really cool kind of just culmination of everything the movie had kind of been working with to this point. Where like Beldar goes back to his home planet and like is immediately essentially punished, and then succeeds and is like, cool, I got to get out of here, got to go back.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a good pick, Andrew. It's the middle of this movie that is most burned into my brain. The first 30 minutes, I always totally forget about. Like how long it takes for Connie to appear, I always forget about. And then the finale, I often forget they travel back to their planet, but I do always remember him beating a monster with golf. That always stood out to me. And singing the Soft Cell song, which I don't know if it really has a purpose, but again, it's, he's using what he learned on Earth to defeat the monster.
I think it's just meant to confuse people, and it works because nobody knows what he's doing except Connie.
Does that help him beat the monster though? That everyone watching is confused? I don't know, but I agree. The
monster's also confused.
Maybe it does look very good. It looks dated, only in the way that stop motion itself is dated. But for stop motion, it is very good. Like they seem to get like the best in the business at the time. I agree, it looks better than some other stuff, like Connie eating that CG sandwich really fast. Certainly feels more dated than this, but I love that they went that direction for that fight. It's really good, Andrew. It's a good pick for best scene because you're thematically tying everything in together with them choosing Earth. I'm tempted to just agree with you because I think it's a fine point. When I think of my favorite scene, again, I've talked about the scenes with Connie are my favorite in the movie. I love their home dynamic, but that spreads out across a few different scenes. But anytime the three of them are like at the kitchen table, it's that's when the movie's firing on all cylinders. It's that dynamic which makes this movie work. Like if that somehow wasn't in the movie, I think a lot of stuff would start to fall apart. But even them fighting, like I mentioned, her green tears, that scene has always stuck out to me, where she is crying in her bed, and the mom has to come in and soothe her in her weird dialect way. And apparently we're getting another different tear, because it seems like Connie sleeps lying down.
Yes.
Whereas her parents still sleep
standing
up, but somehow with a comforter still. I don't really know how that works, but yeah, I don't know. Is it, if it's a cheat to say the home scenes, then I'm just gonna agree with you and say my favorite scene is also the finale. But I want to try to incorporate the scenes of the family life at home. If this were a sitcom, those scenes would be key, and what keeps people coming back every week is that family dynamic.
I think that's right. Actually, I do like that you pointed out the scene where Jane Curtin kind of consoles Connie, because Jane Curtin doesn't get a whole lot of like scenes that are just kind of Primat doing things. Like, she's got some scenes at the grocery store that are kind of like a little weird and awkward, but like she doesn't get a whole lot of stuff to dive into. That's the one scene. And then the scene where she's talking to Beldar and she's kind of like, hey, what would you do if my life function ceased? And he gives this, very, very, conehead answer, but it means the world to her to hear what she said. And those are the things where, like, where he basically says, I would stop functioning and I would die. What I texted you, what does he actually say? He says, the stench would be great. So Chris, imagine the smell. But but these scenes are all really, really great. So I'm gonna let you do it, because I agree. I think they are really well done. I think the family dynamic is really, really a key part of what makes all that work. Where like you've got the parents that are like sort of like kind of adapting to life, like they get it, but they still are weird and kind of don't quite get it. And then you've got Connie, who does get it because she's grown up here. And I think that dynamic of all of that mixing together is just deeply entertaining. So
this movie kind of has its cake and eats it too, in one respect. They are humans trying to blend in on Earth, right? Trying to get by, trying not to be found out as aliens. I said they're humans, they're aliens trying to blend on Earth, excuse me. But this movie also plays it kind of like the Brady Bunch movie, where everyone around them just doesn't acknowledge that they're weird, or that they have a cone head, or like they acknowledge it, but they don't put together like they're probably aliens, because look at them and the way they act. They're just like, most people just totally take it in stride. Like, oh, hey, Jason Alexander, you ever thought about hair? Like, it really changes a man. Like, it's so weird. Again, it's a weird movie. But, like, at the end, I don't know what this event is, because they're all in costumes, too, Andrew. What is that event? They're all in costumes that seem to, like, try to disguise their cone head, but everyone knows they have a cone head. Like, he's Abraham Lincoln because he's got the tall hat, but like, and then Primat is lipstick, but everyone in the town knows they have cone heads and just rolls with it. You know what I mean?
I mean, because like I think that too, and part of it I just think is that's just what the movie decided to do. It's like, we're just not going to acknowledge this, but like, I mean, like Tom Arnold.
It's funny. It's funny.
Like Tom Arnold, I think, looks at Beldar and just even goes, "Wow, what a head!" Like, he just like so it's there. Like, people see it, but like, I guess when you're thinking about that, you have two options. It's like, either they just have weird heads, or they're aliens. Like, what are you really gonna assume the alternative is for why they look like that? Like, like, are you just gonna?
It's a good question. If you had neighbors that had heads that looked like this, Andrew, what would you think?
I wouldn't necessarily jump immediately to their aliens. I don't think that's where I'd go. I think but then like, you think like, and then at the same time, it's like, what does Beldar do? Like, Beldar teaches at a driving school and like fixes his neighbors' lawnmowers, and they have barbecues, and they do stuff like, so like, they just do.
Sinbad also sees him repair appliances in like 4 seconds, moving at supersonic speed. And he's got those crazy teeth for a while that no one acknowledges. Okay, the perfect scene there at the dentist where John Lovitz is the dentist.
Fair, John Lovitz is just like, phew, like just
he's got 3 rows of teeth, and he opens his mouth to have like a foot diameter, and we just roll with it. Like, oh yeah,
and breathe
that. And I'm not like calling the movie out. I kind of like that tone where it's just like, oh, that's kind of weird, but it's obvious that something very strange is going on here. But at the same time, they're trying to blend in disguise. That's what I'm saying. It's trying to have its cake and eat it too. Not in like an I got you kind of way. Like I think it's one of the movie's charms is the way the town just rolls with it. It's like, like Edward Scissorhands. Everyone's like, oh, that's a strange looking guy, and just rolls with it. I think it's fun.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, oddly, Michael McKean also playing the villain in the Brady Bunch movie. Just playing villains in these weird movies where we're not going to call out how strange our lead characters are. One of the scenes that is burned into my brain a lot is the montage when Connie is like growing up, set to Kodachrome by Paul Simon. Like that guitar riff is like in my head at all times. And I think it's actually Dan Aykroyd's daughter, Danielle, who plays Connie when she's that age.
And that's why he felt so comfortable throwing her 30 feet into the air, Andrew, because it's his actual daughter.
Makes sense. What a man dedicated to his craft. I'm not just gonna throw any child 30 feet in the air; it has to be mine. But that whole montage is like in my head of them like buying the house and like the motorcycles and like the helmets that fit over their Coneheads and stuff. Like, just all of that is just, again, you're talking about the home stuff. I guess that's kind of similar, but I just love that. I also love that the intention here is that like once Michael McKean's character got promoted, he stopped they just stopped caring that Beldar had like a fake Social Security card, and like no one really knows what happened there. Like they just stopped looking for him, and I guess he just started calling himself Beldar Conehead. So whatever. But that's basically a bureaucracy thing.
It's such an unnecessary ripple in this movie for this INS agent to be on his ass. He gets promoted. He goes, I don't care. But then the higher ups are like looking through his record, like, oh, what about this guy? And then he's immediately back on the case trying to hunt him down. It's like, why have that moment where he's not chasing them? The movie's less than 90 minutes long. Why have this moment where he's not on their tail and then back on it?
Well, because I think the idea was you had to explain why nobody was looking for them for the entire time Connie grew up. Like, okay, that's like 16, 17 years if we're playing with she's a teenager in high school thing. So like, why suddenly is this guy, like, are they just going to keep moving every year? Like, why suddenly does nobody care for that long? And now that raises some different questions, because I guess he got promoted and they stopped looking for him, and then he was going to get promoted again. And that's when, like, yeah, so I don't know. The passage of time in this movie gets a little wonky.
I say, I'm just now putting this together that David Spade doesn't grow up.
No.
18 years pass and he looks like David Spade still.
Then he's got the secret sauce. Somebody find him.
I honestly, Andrew, I've seen this movie a million times. I never thought about that. I never thought about their daughter growing up and like everyone remains the exact same age. That's pretty funny. Talk about jokes you didn't get as a kid, though. Again, watching his friend of the show, my wife, there's this running gag about chewing gum. He loves chewing gum, blowing bubbles, but what he's chewing on is a condom. And she was like, yeah, definitely didn't get the joke as a kid. I thought it was just a balloon that he liked to chew on. Well, you're kind of right, but there's obviously a little more to it than that.
A little bit, yeah. I love like the scene where Sinbad is driving in the car and he's like, "You got any more of that gum, man?" He pulls out. He's like, "On second thought, I'm all right. I don't want to chew and drive." There's a sequence there where it's Dan Aykroyd, Sinbad, and Adam Sandler sitting at a table, and for some reason my brain was like, "What a weird combination of people to just be sitting at a table in like any context." Like, I don't know why, but like just the three of them together. You got like OG SNL, current SNL, and then Sinbad in the middle of it, and I was like, whatever.
Soul to Squeeze by Red Hot Chili Peppers, a song I've discussed on this podcast because it only existed on the Coneheads soundtrack for so long. Plays twice in the movie. You hear it playing on the car in Ronnie's car, And then when Ronnie and Connie are like gonna finally kiss, it's just playing as like background music. So they got the most out of that exclusive Chili Pepper song they had there. Gotta shout that out. And Andrew, the funniest line of the movie to me, I gotta go to our cast list here. Who plays like the main Conehead, like the czar
Dave Thomas.
or whatever. Dave Thomas? That's Dave Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
He's got my favorite line in the movie. It's after he defeats the monster, and he's gonna make this big declaration about him defeating him and then getting him whatever he wants. And he stands up and goes, "Let it be written." Are you writing this? Immediately after that, to like his sidekick, "Let it be written." Are you writing this? And then he continues with his speech. That little aside. Are you writing this?
You're writing this?
So funny. It's just a perfect.
You seen this? You heard about this?
I cackled.
You seen this? You heard about this? Yeah. Dave Thomas is very, very funny. He's from SCTV as well. He was very notably one half of Bob and Doug McKenzie with Rick Moranis. If you've ever seen Strange Brew or any of those movies, he's an extremely funny individual. Very, very funny, and I loved seeing him here even briefly. Like, I love that David Spade just like sidesteps into being the suck up to the lead Conehead after being like
good
expelled,
payoff
like
for that character.
Literally,
Yeah.
just like slides right in, like, and then after they all think Beldar's dead, he's just like, it's like Beldar has died in battle. The best way to go. He's like, he will be missed. Like, just jumps right in and is immediately just like sucking up and like even doing like the he's in a mood. Let me give that to him. And like, just that character, it's just perfect for that character. But Dave Thomas
100%.
is extremely funny. I love seeing him anytime he's on screen, so I like seeing him here too.
Andrew, it's a pretty good movie. I mean, I think we've covered like the highlights of my favorite scenes. It's weird. It's a movie that I am very curious how it would play to kids today that didn't grow up with it. Because again, it's not the kind of movie to be made today. It's so weird. It's so 90s in a lot of ways. And I don't know, it's hard to separate if I didn't grow up with this movie watching it, how I would feel watching it today. Maybe it plays just as well to a younger generation. Maybe it's like they would say, "What the hell is this?" And I'm not. I really don't know. It's like a very much of its time how it feels to me. But I still enjoy watching this movie.
I do want to shout out the finale real quick before we wrap things up. Just the way this movie kind of ends, where basically Beldar successfully Narthles the Garthok and basically says, "I'm going to go back to Earth and I'm going to take it over." They eventually, we mentioned that he does the green card thing at the end with Michael McKean, but they basically come back to Earth. He goes to the planet first, and like you can tell that like Connie is just upset that he's going to conquer Earth. Like, she's not going to go back to her life. She's going to have to live in whatever this thing is. And like I said, it kind of builds off of the scene before where he uses what he learned on Earth to save them during the fight, but then he like last minute basically reframes it like, "Oh, nope, I'm under attack. You guys need to get away." His whole family evacuate. He sends the ship up. It explodes. They all, everybody in the, the whatever you call them, the Conehead race thinks he's gone. And, at the moment where he says it and he's like sending out the alert to everyone, like even Primat, like Jane Curtin's face, like you can see she realizes what he's doing. And she's just happy that he's doing it. And then, he says, it's not every day a father can give his child the world. And I was like,
such a good line.
I was like, so good. And yeah, it's just really like, I like that ending goes on. It gives us the kind, like you said, having your cake and eating it too, because now they're just here. They don't have to worry. There's nobody coming. And they just get to live this life where they have all these friends and people that like them. So why wouldn't you? That's the dream, right? Fix your neighbor's lawnmower, then he tries to sell you a toupee. Something like that.
All right, Andrew. New month, SNL month, kicking off with a bang. Coneheads. This was a nice, easy warm-up. Again, it's a movie I've seen a million times now, 1,000,001. Fun to talk about. Still enjoy it. I think we got some pretty easy waters still continuing forward. We'll be talking Wayne's World 2 next week. the follow up to Wayne's World that didn't quite have as warm a reception, but a movie I'm familiar with, and I think I won't have trouble liking. And then, we've got some other movies after that. But off to a good start, I should say. How you feeling?
So far, so good. We're dealing with we're in the childhood nostalgia phase right now. Like Coneheads, Wayne's World 2. Those are movies I definitely remember watching when I was younger a lot. It's after those two that things are going to potentially take a turn.
We'll get there. But for now, it is time for our question of the week. If you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do exactly that by hopping into our Discord server. There's a link to join us right there in your show notes. However you're listening to this, on your favorite podcast catcher, just go to show notes. You're listening on YouTube, go right there to the description of the video. YouTube, yeah, all these episodes are on YouTube, and we haven't really promoted it much out of every now and then mentioning it here, but there's been a growing number of listeners on YouTube. So if you're listening on YouTube, thanks. Keep listening here. This is how you listen to podcasts. But if you use a traditional podcast catcher and you want to catch us over there, feel free to subscribe. We're on there. But anyway, if you want to leave us a question, you got to get into that Discord. It's free. If you've never used Discord before, just trust me. Jump in. It's fun. And you can leave a question, just like we got from Frank and Waffles, who says, So, a Goofy movie features a major plot around getting to a Powerline concert. Do you guys think that Powerline is more based on Prince or Bobby Brown? Is it a 60-40 split? And if so, which way? And then they provide some pictures. We have Powerline looking like Powerline in his cool yellow getup, followed by Prince also wearing yellow and purple, and then Bobby Brown wearing a yellow jacket, like almost turtleneckish jacket kind of thing. Interesting question. Andrew, I have an immediate answer. Do you?
No, not after I got asked this question.
Okay, well, so I'll go first here. I have always thought Prince. And just from his look, the way he dances, the way he sounds, I thought it was a 1-for-1 Prince stand-in. Now, I will say, Bobby Brown wasn't really on my radar ever. As a performer, anyway. I know some more controversial things he's made the news for, obviously, whatever. But I didn't really grow up with Bobby Brown music or ever dive into it. Like this picture where I'm seeing, I can see the resemblance with this picture, but I've never seen this image before. So that might be one reason why I've always gone Prince. But even still, just based on the way his music sounds, and again, he's always been Prince for me. I say Prince.
Having never listened to Bobby Brown and have no understanding of the man, he's always been Prince to you.
That's my expert opinion. Yeah, I'm sticking with Prince.
I assumed growing up that he was obviously a mishmash of things. Like, obviously, Prince and Michael Jackson are kind of your easy to go-tos. Now, the only thing that ever stopped me from going fully into Prince is that Powerline only sings. Prince does a lot more than just singing. Like, Prince obviously shreds on guitar and things like that. So that always kind of stuck in the back of my brain, that there was a little bit more to Prince than there was to Powerline. So my brain was always kind of like, he's probably just like a mishmash of several stars. And I've always, like, Bobby Brown, I will admit for me, never entered the conversation. But once he brought it up, I was like, well, yeah, he has to be. Like, the minute you introduce Bobby Brown into that conversation, I think you can't really deny that there's definitely a piece of Powerline that is probably inspired by Bobby Brown. Now, what I've read in the past is that the answer to who inspires them is yes. It's all of them. Like, Powerline was never meant to be any one person, but just instead like a pulling from a many different places, all of which is Michael Jackson, Prince, and Bobby Brown, and probably others as well. Because there was a rumor for a while that Bobby Brown was supposed to voice Powerline before they ended up voicing the guy they got, but that has been denied multiple times. But the minute he showed, like, the minute he was like, is Powerline supposed to be Bobby Brown? I was like, maybe? Like, I had never thought about it before, but it's a perfectly relevant, and it would have been a semi-topical thing at the time for it to slightly be based on Bobby Brown. So, yeah, I actually really freaked Liz out the other day because I walked up and I said, I have a really important question to ask you. and it's a little bit of a controversial topic, and I don't want to freak you out, but I need to ask you. And she was like, okay. And I went, so in a Goofy movie, is Powerline based on Prince or Bobby Brown? And she just looked at me like, what? Jesus. Like, she was like, Jesus Christ, Andrew. Like,
so prepared for something heavy. That's good. I'm standing by my answer. I realize maybe it's coming from a point of ignorance because I'm not as well versed in other. I don't know. Michael Jackson. Other than the fact that he's a pop star, I really don't see Michael Jackson, because I feel like if you're doing a Michael Jackson reference, you're gonna moonwalk and you're gonna grab your crotch. And to my memory, he doesn't do either of those.
Are you literally suggesting that those are the only two things Michael Jackson does?
Of course, I am not suggesting that, Andrew. What I am saying is, if you're gonna make a character that is supposed to be a stand-in for Michael Jackson, you will do signature Michael Jackson things that are most attributed to him. That's what I'm saying. So the theory,
I guess.
Okay, look, the answer is obviously he's an amalgamation, but that is a boring answer because then it comes out not really being specific to any one person. So I think that's why I'm sticking with Prince. Yeah, it's probably multiple people, but like I don't see much Michael Jackson there. Unless it's, some of this, some of that, but that's kind of a boring answer. So I want to be definitive and say Prince, but it doesn't matter, Andrew, because these are all wrong answers anyway. Right there in the Discord, Flamin' Queso responds to this question.
Don't do this.
It says that we're wrong. The Goofy movie creators actually saw into the future, and Powerline is in fact Bruno Mars.
No.
And they back it up with photo evidence. There's an article from BuzzFeed. You gotta trust BuzzFeed, Andrew. World journalists over there doing their work. 10 pictures that prove Bruno Mars is actually Powerline from a Goofy movie. And they're pretty convincing. They got them side by side, and I can definitely see the resemblance down to the hair.
No. I'm sorry. No. BuzzFeed. No. BuzzFeed, you've gone too far.
Well, what do you think? Who is Powerline supposed to be? Do you see one person more strong than anyone else? Do you think it's just an amalgamation? Do you have a good argument for why he is based on one artist more so than another? We want to hear all about it. You can let us know in that Discord or on social media. Once again, Discord link in the show notes. It's free. Come and join us. And join us next week as we discuss Wayne's World 2 as SNL month rolls on. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. I mix up Tom Arnold and Phil Hartman all the time in my brain. That's another one of those things you can get mad at me about, but
I can. My God, show some respect to Phil Hartman, man. Jesus.
So sorry.
I will say this for Tom Arnold. I don't know if you've seen True Lies, Chris.
I haven't.
True Lies,
4K's out there now.
It is. I will say, you talk about casting somebody in a role that specifically works to 100% their strengths and hides all of their weaknesses. Tom Arnold in True Lies is exactly that.
I would say the same thing about Tom Arnold in Austin Powers, where his big scene is to be in a toilet stall and say, yeah, you show that turd who's boss.
Yep, sure.
Maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to
Yep.
Andrew, I almost said thank you to Bobby Brown. I gotta not look at words while I talk. Jesus Christ. No thanks to Bobby Brown. He has nothing to do with this.
No.
Jesus Christ.